We've been reading over the past few weeks quite a lot of information, and there's lots to drag out the stories. Even just this past week, as we've sort of like reached the end of Genesis and gone into Exodus, there's just so much to read. There's so much to pick up on, and it can be hard to find just one thing to talk about. But I want to talk about something that's kind of overarching a lot of it at the moment, and that's found in Exodus 2:23 to 25, and it says this. During that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. And that will give us quite a good clue and a key on how to interpret just the past few weeks of what we've been reading. You know, there's four main points there: that God hears, God sees, God remembers, and God knows. God hears the cry of the human heart. In Psalm 34, we hear that the righteous cry out and the Lord hears them and he delivers them from all their troubles. And in Lamentations, we hear the writer saying that I called out by your name. On your name, O Lord, I cried out. From the depths of the pit, you heard my plea. God hears us, and it may not seem like he hears us, but he does hear us. In fact, Isaiah tells us that even before we speak, even before we ask him, he knows what we're going to say. And God just doesn't hear our prayers either, because sometimes we can be tempted to think that. But as what we've read over the past few weeks, it should become evident that he hears a lot more than that. He hears our suffering, he hears our grief, he hears our joy, and he hears our laughter. And we read that throughout the journey of Israel, as we read throughout the Bible, we realize that God hears them and that God hears us, and specifically, God hears you. And not so long ago, we read Hagar's story, and in fact, I spoke on that a little, and that whole story is about this next point, that God sees. We're not much farther on in our readings here than that story, but God sees, and we're seeing that he sees again here. He is El Rohi, the God who sees. And in Matthew 10, it tells us that God knows even the number of hairs on our head. And I've said this before, that's easier for him with some people than others. I guess it's a lot easier in lockdown for many people. Psalm 139 tells us, as we've read, that he even saw us in our mother's womb. His sight isn't limited to just the past or even directly to the now, right now. He sees past the temporal, that which is within time, and that is because he exists outside of time. And because of that, he can see your potential. He can see all those multiple streams where it could end up, what you're like, what you could be. He's the one person that can actually see that and believe in you, that you can reach that and attain that. And that's just amazing when somebody can do that. So don't just think that he can see your circumstances, although he does. He can see everything. In fact, as we read a bit farther on in the Bible past this point, we find out that you can't hide anything from God. He actually sees everything that we try and hide and put away. So it's best that we don't even try and hide from him. He is the God who sees. He's the God who sees the root of the human condition. There are three signs of growing old. The first one is memory loss. The second and third, I can't quite remember. We might forget, but God doesn't. He's the God who remembers. We have read that God remembered Noah, that he remembered Abraham, that he remembered Rachel, and recently the Israelites. And he doesn't just have a short memory either. He's got a very long memory. Psalm 105 tells us that he remembers covenants, that's an old name for contracts, forever, even to 1,000 generations. So when you make a contract or an oath or something with somebody, you better be careful because God's listening in on that and he'll remember that. So he remembers all that kind of thing. You know, we find it really easy to forget stuff, but God doesn't. I mean, it doesn't, like when we remember some stuff, it just comes back to us in a flash, doesn't it? You know, we go, oh, I forgot that, or I nearly forgot that. But his thoughts aren't like fleeting thoughts like that. We're constantly before his gaze. He remembers everything all the time. All the time. There's only one thing he can forget. And that's because he chooses to forget this, that when we believe in him, when we put our trust in him, when we acknowledge who he is, when we say sorry for the things that we've done, then he forgets those sins, those transgressions, those crossing the lines with him. That's the only thing God can forget. So today you need to know that you have not been forgotten. You might feel like a spare part on a shelf somewhere, but God hasn't forgotten you. You might think, I've had all these dreams and all these visions and nothing's happened, but God hasn't forgot that he's given you dreams, that he's given you visions. You might think, oh, I received all these promises from God, but nothing ever happened. What's happened there? God doesn't forget the promises he's made to you. You might say, I've been through loads of injustice. Where has God been through that? God doesn't forget that injustice that's been done to you. You might have been accused of something. People accuse people all the time. And God hears that and God remembers that too. You may have suffered. You may have had bad illness for a lot of your life. God sees and God knows that. He does not forget it. He sees what you've done, who you are all the time, and he remembers it. And more to the point, a lot of that he holds dearly to his heart. He remembers you. He remembers his promises to you. And God doesn't just remember, he knows things. Let me explain a bit further in that. In 1 Samuel 2 verse 3 we read this, talk no more so very proudly, let not arrogance come from your mouth, for the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. God knows things better than we know things. You see, he doesn't just see or hear stuff, and his knowledge isn't acquired like ours is when it's kind of acquired over time and by teaching us. God's knowledge isn't like that. He just knows inside out from the beginning. After all, who's God's teacher? Who can teach the Lord things? And his knowledge goes far beyond some of the ways that we think and we operate, you know, kind of formalic expressions, you know, we run our lives by rules, don't we? If this happens, then I'm going to do this. If this happens, then I'm going to do this. He doesn't do that. No, his depth goes far beyond that. It goes far beyond empathy. You know, that sense of sitting in somebody else's shoes. It goes beyond that. It goes beyond just feeling our joy and our pain. And the same goes for justice and mercy. Now, God is a just and merciful God. You know, what's right and what's wrong, knowing what's right and what's wrong. But how he knows things goes beyond that too, and the outcomes of that. You see, there's that technical word, isn't there, for God, that he's an omniscient, an all-knowing God. Because in him, all experiences, all feelings, all insight, all notions, all thoughts, multiplied by thousands upon thousands of people over thousands of generations, is known. And more to the point, he doesn't just know all that information, he knows you personally and individually. The very character that made you up, how he designed you, how he planned you. He knows everything about you. He's the God who knows the very details of our life. So as I wrap this up, look at this. Know that God hears you, sees you, remembers you, and knows you. And let's just take a pause right now as you think about those things. You see, because if God hears you, sees you, remembers you, and knows you, he's brought you to this moment in time now. He knows your circumstances now. He knows your situation now. He knows what you're feeling right now. Just think about that a moment. So how is that going to frame your thoughts from now on? And what you do? From today, tomorrow, next week, how does it change all that? How does it change your work or your family life or your studies? What does that mean about the dreams that you have now and the visions that you have now and the hopes that you have now?
Who can know the mind of our Creator? Who can speak of wonders yet unseen? Who can reach the heights of understanding to play the notes of wisdom's melody? Who has weighed dust of every mountain? Who has walked the mysteries of the deep? Who has laid the earth on its foundation? And who conducts the waves upon the sea? I stand in awe seen the end from the beginning. You have been before the world began. You have reached to me within my darkness. In the light of mercy now I see. I stand in awe. Have seen the end from the beginning. You have been before the world began. You have reached to me within my darkness. In the light of mercy now I see. I stand in awe of you. I stand in awe of you. So glorious and true. I stand in awe. I stand in awe. I stand in awe of you. I stand in awe of you. So glorious and true. I stand in awe. I stand in awe. Stand in awe of you. You alone are holy, deserving all my praise. There's none like you.